happening now. We'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 82 for Wednesday, January the 17th, 2018. My name is Wes Fryer, and I am joining you from frigid Oklahoma City, which was 6 degrees this morning when went to work, and I think we're a little bit cooler than Missoula, Montana, which since we've been watching Stranger Things, if you're a fan, seems like we're living in the upside down. But joining me as always is Jason Neiffer. Jason, how are things in balmy Missoula tonight?
They're good. It's currently 34 degrees Fahrenheit in fabulous Missoula, Montana, which is pretty warm for a January day here in the Garden City of Western Montana. And we are apparently looking forward to some snow next week, but it's hard to say. We're going to probably hit the low 50s. There's actually rain forecasted for tonight. And then tomorrow, some additional rain. And so who knows? It's a weather wonderland here in fabulous Big Sky country.
It is. Well, I am the director of technology at the Cassidy School, and Jason, you're still hanging on there. Have people come back to the University of Montana to join your team?
Meaning
at work. Like, weren't you guys kind of lone folks on campus for a little while over the holidays? I mean, it was the professorial cadre doesn't exactly hang out and work the holiday shift.
No, that's exactly the case. And we were kind of doing our best Tom Bodette. We were keeping the light on for people so they could come back to the University of Montana. Yeah, faculty were actually, there's a retreat in the college where my department is located at tomorrow, and then classes start next week. And actually, I found out that I'm going to be teaching a class this semester. Mike Augustinelli, who's my partner in crime at the Digital Academy, are going to teach the EdTech class. One of the sections of the EdTech class is coming semester. As they're kind of shifting folks around to make the best use of professorial resources. And so we've been syllabus planning, and so I get to, in my last semester of working as a doctoral student, I will also be teaching, so I am kind of doing the doctoral lifestyle here, a little overcommitted and under-timed, so we'll see what that process looks like.
And underpaid, perhaps.
Well, yes, yeah. True. It's an adjunct gig, and the department head, when he asked me to consider teaching the course, reminded me of the low pay, and I said, well, it's the adjuncting gig, right? Luckily, I have a day job to keep me, in high-end booze and cigars, but we'll call that good for the semester. So, lots of interesting things going on in the tech world, lots of interesting discussions right now, and it's interesting. Both Wes and I this week brought in some links, and by the way, for those of you interested, you can see all the links to all the stories we refer to on this week's episode at our website, edtechsr.com. But both Wes and I moved a little philosophical this week, I think. And so we're excited to talk about a number of different issues. And then to throw in some spice, we've got some true nerdy things we can speak about as well. So, Dr. Fryer, where would you like to start off this evening?
Well, actually, I think I'd like to start off with the Facebook feed, because I think this is a pretty big deal. And I'll just preface it by saying, hey, last night I was going to write a blog post, and I thought, well, you got to write this on Facebook, and unfollowed 52 people. And, what's going on? Well, Facebook has announced that they are making some major changes to the news feed. And so excellent article in Wired Magazine on January the 13th, Facebook's Adam Mosseri on why you'll see less video, more from friends. Other articles that I read on this were the Monday Note, which is actually I think it's a personal blog, but it's a great article. Facebook is done with quality journalism, deal with it. And then that was from January 15th. And then the Wall Street Journal on January 12th said one website's Facebook apocalypse is another opportunity to shine. And basically, this is my interpretation of it. Facebook has come under a lot of very warranted criticism with the election and the ways in which fake news ran rampant, and their inability or perhaps unwillingness, but I think it had to do with sheer volume. One of these articles says that Facebook's got about 1 billion pieces of content that's shared on their network daily, so they can't hire even if they're using mechanical, what is it called? What's that, Mechanical Turk, or what's the when you're paying people fractions of a penny to do little menial tasks. I mean, the quantity is just enormous. They have to use algorithms, so they have been criticized for not basically chiming in on the whole fake news thing and being a gatekeeper. And so I think there's two sides to this. The Wired article with Adam Mosseri, talks about how Zuckerberg wants Facebook to be a place where the positive comes out, where people, come together and where community is built. Zuckerberg went on a nationwide tour. He was actually here in Oklahoma. I read an article on his last, stop, and he was like having dinner at people's homes, and surprised at how much civic groups and church and other things played into the lives of the common people not living in the ivory tower of Silicon Valley. And so, people have had rumors about him running for president. Hey, we heard Oprah might run for president right after the Golden Globes. But anyway, he wants to promote community and obviously wants to still make money and make Facebook viable. So there perhaps are, as there often are, a couple sides to the story. I think one of them that's definitely true is Facebook just can't hire enough people to be able to gatekeep the quantity of content that's being published. And number two, it's exceptionally difficult to ascertain if you wanted to whitelist folks like, oh, this is now legitimate and this is not. And so Facebook is now going to be de-emphasizing and devaluing news links, and is going to be emphasizing things that are creating engagement among users, especially with family and friends. And so that's really going to favor comments as well as likes, and it's going to de-emphasize. And so I've probably told the story before, and it is a joke, but it's true, that my wife several years ago had threatened to unfriend me on Facebook because of all the drivel that I was sharing, because I at the time was cross-posting and from Twitter, and I kind of just felt like, oh, Google Plus, Facebook, Twitter, they're all the same. I'd love to share stuff. I'm going to just share all this, all these things. And anyway, it has become for me a much more personal place as far as sharing family updates. I do, and if you're here, we've got a couple live viewers out there. I definitely do promote the show, and the occasional blog post that I write now, I'll put out there, but I'm not sharing tons of article links. And so anyway, I have, for a number of probably years, but also with all the talk we've done about surveillance and Facebook and what they know. And, I've changed some of the ways that I use the platform, not, liking and checking in and all that stuff as much. So I've decided to really embrace the change that Facebook is bringing. And if I honestly just don't know somebody, and I know, different people virtually, but there's a fairly substantial number of folks that I've just followed because they're into EdTech and they had so many other followers in common, et cetera. And I've just decided to go ahead and unfollow a lot of those folks, and possibly, and this is what I would ask for your advice on, possibly maybe not make a public profile, maybe make a private profile. So, Jason, what do you think of all of this, and is this going to have an impact, on the ways you use Facebook personally?
Sure. Well, I've always been very careful about Facebook, and one of the reasons why is that there's a couple of reasons. First, I do think people are sometimes overly sad on Facebook and share a little bit too much of the trauma and the tragedies of their lives, and it's never been a place where personally I've wanted to share information like that. I've shared challenges, I've shared joys on Facebook with people that are. And I used to have a rule that I actually never friended anyone. I just waited for people to friend me, and for me, it's been a challenge to kind of figure out that ebb and flow. But this notion of turning Facebook more into the interpersonal relationships as opposed to the idea of maybe Facebook moving away from more being a news platform, if Facebook moving away from being a media platform or a publishing platform, it's a very interesting phenomenon. The thing that I can't wrap my brain around, though, is how that remains profitable. When I think about the book that The Social Network was based off of, it's called The Accidental Billionaires. And it was an interesting look inside of this. And the movie treats it a little differently than the reality of the book. But one of the big questions that Facebook faced when it initially started was how to monetize. And the monetize question is not an insubstantial one. one because, there are a lot of startups and a lot of Silicon Valley companies that are popular with users that have no functional model for raising money, and then they become a tool that doesn't last. But Facebook makes billions of dollars in profit every year based on largely advertising. And so the question and there's been a lot of articles on the changes and evolution of Facebook. So what happens to advertising now, and what happens to, as a small business owner myself, as someone that works with nonprofit, to advertise on Facebook? It's a very successful platform for me as a social media person from an advertising standpoint. How does that then work? And there's been some answers to this, and I know Facebook has reached out a lot to Facebook advertisers to try to explain to them how they're evolving this process. But it's interesting to me. How do you maintain a really personalized connection system while not being able to, and I'll use the word here, exploit that for income? And that balance there, I think, is going to be somewhat critical in determining what this looks like in the upcoming months and years.
And the key is really, what will this look like for political advertising, right? Because
Yes.
that was one of the most contentious things in the election, were these very targeted ads that would be anti, Clinton, a lot of those. And, things that would never go up on a billboard, that in a public place. But, there was just literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different iterations of these ads being shown and the ways in which they were targeted. So nothing that I've read in these articles says that advertising is going away or diminishing. It sounds like, news links that people are choosing to share in their feed as users are going to be de-emphasized. But what I think is going to be critical, and I don't think we have these in the show notes, but I'm listening to my Google Home now saying, got to be careful. Hey, G, what's my, good morning. What's my briefing? And they're saying there's a great podcast I like to listen to usually a couple times a week now called The Cyber Wire, which is a cyber safety, cybersecurity podcast. They're saying that the CIA has basically fingered Russia as the source of the was it called the cyber brokers, the something brokers that put out all of these tools and these hacking tools. And so in terms of the election that's coming up and midterm elections in the United States, there's reports of the Russians evidently attempting to continue meddling and hacking. And so I personally think that that artificial intelligence is going to play a key role here. Yeah. I don't think that it has matured to the point where it's going to be able to accurately discern, but I think Facebook is going to try and employ whatever AI algorithmic tools it can to bring to bear here. And I would hazard an absolute guess. It's not based on the articles, but just based on analysis, that they're going to use algorithms to try and determine if the nature of an ad is political, and then perhaps, hopefully, subject that to more scrutiny than they would, say, if we were, advertising for a product or a known store or something like that. So I get how they don't want to say, hey, you're a legit news source and we're whitelisted, you're not, you're blacklisted. And we may talk a little bit about YouTube as well and some of the changes that they're making on monetization, which is to deal with some, related things as well as some other issues. But I think that to take an educational spin on this, it's really important for us to, number one, be talking with students about this and to recognize the ways in which communication and advertising and political campaigning, all of these things are changing, right? And so it's not something I think that we should ignore. And I think that we need our students writing for, even if it's for a class assignment, audiences that we may not have been thinking about, 10 years, 20 years ago, and thinking about, ways in which we're, using images, we're using video, we're using media to attempt to persuade and attempt to, it's that whole media literacy piece, right? Becoming more aware as citizens of how students are being manipulated or are being influenced, so that we'll be more aware of what's happening and have our eyes open. So do you think media literacy plays a significant role in the curriculum in Montana, Jason? And is that something that you hear people talking about much now, or is it just in the context of this fake news and that kind of discussion today?
It was a really big deal in Montana 15 years ago, and so much so that a lot of particularly English language arts departments in the state of Montana, at middle schools and high schools, were starting to adopt media literacy curriculum. My wife was briefly an English teacher when we were starting teaching together, and she was big into media literacy and did a lot of things related to advertising literacy and message literacy. And it feels like that, I don't know, those lessons seemed uncouth maybe in the era of the internet, right? When it's, in my mind, it's when it's needed the most. And I think, if anything, that for the longest while we had a very large group of educators, librarians, that were kind of warning us about the internet. And I thought that some of those warnings were overwrought, because I knew at one point that good reference materials would get digitized, and that at some point we would have sources of authority available to us on something like, larger internet databases. But, I think that's really an answer to this. It's not going to fix everything, right? It's not going to immediately make social media not a source of discontent in this regard, but it really is an important step to making sure that long term, I was trying to mix the words long term and longitudinally, long term, or longitudinally, there is a real benefit to making sure that we're focusing on those pieces in these in the way we plan, and the way we plan and deliver these pieces. So, I'm excited. I think that journalism and broadly needs our support in these times. I think that we are in an era where platforms are being challenged in this way. I wouldn't say that I'm totally happy about Facebook moving away from journalism, because I do think it is a way to distribute mainstream journalism to the masses, where it's convenient, as opposed to sending people out to websites that may or may not get shared. But we're just going to have to see what it looks like. And I guess I would applaud Mr. Zuckerberg and his team. I think they understand that if they don't make some changes, then Facebook's going to turn into what MySpace was 15 years ago, which was a dead space that wasn't really meeting the needs of its users.
Well, and the changes are going to be made for them, right? I think that's probably one of their greatest fears is regulators. And we had all those hearings in front of Senate committees before Christmas. And so they want to self-regulate much in the way that I think AT&T and other ISPs, want to try to police themselves so that, the government doesn't come in and screw stuff up. And there are legitimate concerns for government regulators who are always going to be several steps behind technology, trying to come in and fix things with regulation. But the other thought I have is that I think personally we all need to be open to perhaps changing the ways that we're using different platforms and technologies. We've commented on the show before that it's difficult at this point to imagine life without Twitter. Twitter is such a huge part of the learning landscape for so many educators, Jason and myself included. And, Twitter is able to be shaped and shifted and channeled, with other kinds of tools like Flipboard. And I still love to, take a look. In fact, it's not every day, but it's several times a week. I have a Twitter list of all the teachers at my school, and I have a magazine. I guess it's not a magazine, but it's a channel inside the Flipboard app, which I can get on my Android phone, but I usually look mostly on my iPad. And it's just great, to be able to catch up with what people are sharing in that kind of, local way. And it really, it's important in terms of helping me be aware and have conversations with people and just, it's part of that learning landscape. So anyway, I think it's good for us to be open to change. Some of these changes, obviously, some of the things that were being said in this Monday Note article about, Facebook's done with quality journalism, deal with it, is, hey, they're a private company, they can do what they want. They don't have an obligation to save journalism. And, we're just like we see web tools and different kinds of things moving and morphing. We're going to continue to see those kind of things change, and the door is open too, right, for folks to figure out how to reinvent journalism, and also, what other kinds of social media platforms are going to dominate. And so these are good conversations. I'm looking forward to sharing some of these with parents and a couple digital citizenship events that we're going to be hosting, and I'll be participating in upcoming weeks. And my daughter, when we said something about Facebook, and we were talking about, you know, an elementary family that was concerned about their daughter in Facebook, and she's like, she's not going to be on Facebook. I mean, this is talking about a third or fourth grader, you know, when she gets to middle school. So just the dynamic nature of the landscape that we live in.
Well, and think about it from this standpoint. Schools have had to evolve. It's guidance is probably a strong word here, but remember, it wasn't all that long ago we were all wringing our hands because kids would go onto Facebook and communicate with one another or find creepers online, right? And like that is still a concern, I think. At least the creeper part of it is, right? Like that's certainly a concern worth at least keeping in mind. But there are endless opportunities to connect with people online now. Facebook's just one of them, and I thought this to be true when it happened. Facebook cleaned up its act in that regard when moms showed up, right? Like when moms invaded Facebook, they did do a lot of house cleaning here. But you know, I think that and to be clear, I'm not blaming Facebook's current problems on moms. Sorry, mom. But the other piece of this is that there is deeper systemic problems here that we have to come to terms with, and I'm not sure if we as a community can do it. I think it has to be Facebook that steps in and thinks about how does the platform work and how are we connected with one another.
All right. Well, shout out. We didn't ask Peggy what the temperature is. Peggy George is in our chat room out in Arizona. And Marta is with us from Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and I asked her what's the temperature, and she said 13. So I had to go to Google, do a quick conversion, and that is 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's actually, you know, relatively cool. But if you are in our chat room, we welcome you and invite you to chime in with any questions, thoughts that you may have, or directions that you would like to take this. And both Marta and Peggy say they cannot imagine life without Twitter at this point either. Peggy says it was 72 today in Phoenix. So at least some parts of the country are as they should be with weather. We'd kind of expect that. Well, Jason, where would you like to go next? We definitely have a bunch, and as usual, I mean, there's no way we're covering all these articles, right? So,
no.
In fact, Peggy and Marta, if there's anything in particular you definitely want us to get to in the show, you know, let us know, because we're not getting into it all tonight.
So I want to talk about security for a minute, and partially because I have some personal things to report here. First and foremost, companies and hardware and software manufacturers are now rolling out fixes to the so-called Meltdown and Spectre vulnerabilities that exist in CPUs and other processor hardware, pretty much every device created in the last 20 years. And I posted a really great article from PC World on January 13th that talks about how much the Meltdown and Spectre fix hurt a Surface Book. And I talked to a lot of people on Twitter I had some people back channel me about this, and I had some people connect with me on LinkedIn of all places, which I have never really had people connect with me directly before on there. Miguel Guin is one of the folks that pinged me back and forth because his Surface Book updated last week, and he said that his i7 Surface Book wasn't impacted. His i5 Surface Book, however, was significantly impacted. So I was very curious, and I actually had 3 systems this week update with specific fixes for that. One of them is actually 2 of them are cloud-ready Chromium OS devices. I use the cloud-ready platform to turn an older laptop, an 8-year-old laptop, 7-year-old laptop, and then I have a desktop computer at home that's a very fast gaming machine that is kind of between operating systems right now, and I installed cloud-ready on it a couple weeks ago just because I knew it'd be ridiculously fast. Both of those updated, and the home or the gaming PC was actually faster after the update, and part of it's because they also rolled out some new support for more modern operating systems, so I think it was out in the wash. The i5 Chromium OS cloud-ready Neverware Chromebook clone significantly slowed down, so much so it went from being kind of an easy-to-use daily driver if I want it to be, to something that feels very slow, and so we'll see if that gets tweaked. But my story here that's most interesting is that I was very curious based on my conversations with Miguel about the Surface Book, which is Microsoft's product. It's about 1.5 years old now, and I have one that was my computer upgrade at work, and I've never been totally happy with the performance, even though it has a high-end i7 chip and 16 gigabytes of RAM, it always felt a little slow to me. So I installed the updates. I did before and after benchmarking, and the after was a little faster than the before. And so I said to myself, something's off here. Like something's not where it should be. And so I decided on Tuesday to wipe the machine and start over again with a fresh install of Windows. And the most amazing thing happened to me. When it went to do Windows updates, it not only updated to the latest version of Windows, which was the Creators Update, it also found 15 different hardware updates. And so I went in and downloaded all those, and it turns out that I hadn't been receiving any of the firmware updates, which was pretty extraordinary. So there was a major change for me in regards to that. And so I've installed all the updates, and there is it's much faster now. So I don't know if maybe I should have done that in the first place. And I've always been a fan of, if you don't know what's installed, reinstall Windows from scratch. And I think reinstalling Windows from scratch is a good idea once a year anyways, if you're a Windows user or a Mac user for that matter. But that's been my kind of big update in regards to that. So it's very interesting that there's a lot of talk now about various software implementations to try to deal with Meltdown and Spectre. Android Central reports that Chrome is rolling out something called site isolation, which is in part due to these individual pieces. And so that's an interesting way of going about that process. Also, a lot of people have perceived there to be slowdowns, particularly on websites and other groups that might have been impacted by this. And that's rolling out too. So I think it's really important that we keep an eye on this. If you work in context of a tech, you're a tech director or you're a power user in your school, my guess is for newer platforms, you're going to start to see both rollouts to the software that helps run your hardware, and then of course Windows, Mac OS, and then also Linux and Chromium OS and Chrome OS for that matter are all going to install updates at one point, and we'll have to see if the suspected slowdowns become a larger issue. So happy to report that my Surface Book is in better shape now, only because, and one thing I mentioned, Wes, that when I reinstalled Windows on my Surface Book, it ended up there was 9 firmware updates that it found that it didn't find before I reinstalled the operating system, and now that hardware is singing along in ways it was never before, including I was having Wi-Fi connection issues that I had actually put in an initial request to return it for a replacement hardware, and those are all cleaned up after I reinstalled Windows. So it goes back to the message that I've always found this to be true of both Windows and Mac OS. But if you're experiencing significant problems, assuming you're smart and you back up stuff to a cloud so that's not a big deal. If you wipe your operating system, it's a pain to reinstall the software sometimes. But if your data is safe somewhere in the cloud, reinstalling the OS is a great option. So those are kind of my adventures in updating to deal with Meltdown and Spectrum. And we'd love to hear from you if you're dealing with this, particularly if you're a tech director and you're starting to get hardware and firmware updates from Dell, HP, Lenovo. I've not heard of any being rolled out right now except for Microsoft and except for software updates from varieties of manufacturers, but we'll see what that looks like in the future.
Marta put into the chat, maybe your antivirus didn't allow the updates. It sounds like it did, but we talked about this last week on the show. Microsoft has done something different where you have to have an approved antivirus and a malware program running, and that can be Windows Defender or Security Essentials. But if you don't have that, then your registry, there's a special registry key that needs to get changed in order to get the update. So I'm real interested in tracking with that as well, Jason. We've got only a couple users, but they're both administrators at our school who are on Surface Books, and we've had some different problems and issues with them. So I'm thrilled to hear about the improvement. I will go so far as a tech director to say that re-imaging machines, whether they're computer lab machines, they're shared laptops, or they're individual laptops, it's an essential part of security hygiene today.
Yeah.
And it's really the only way. It's like a nuclear option. I mean, we were doing this back in the late 90s with Ghost in the Windows 95 computer lab when I was at Rush Elementary in Lubbock, Texas, and it would take a little while, but we'd be able to reinstall everything from scratch, and then you'd make a pristine image, save it to the Novell server. Remember that? That brings back some nightmares for some of us. The Novell client. And then you'd use a floppy disk to start it up, and then you'd pull the image, etc. But as you had stuff installed and things like that, it was the best way to clean up. So today, it's really not something that's just for the enterprise. It's something for individuals as well. And so, like Jason said, being able to have your stuff backed up and restoring from the cloud is something we need to do with our smartphones, with our tablets, as well as our other devices. I will chime in with one other security article, and this comes from Android Central on January 15th. Oh, no, sorry. That was the Chrome isolation. This is Ars Technica on January 16th. Google Chrome extensions with 500,000 downloads found to be malicious. And so we've definitely talked about before on the show differences in ecosystems, with iOS having really a tighter and more carefully gate-kept app community, and Google with the Google Play Store being a bit more of the Wild West. We definitely hear more stories about there being some Google, actually not Google, but it's really more Android Play Store things that are, hijacking, or, that have some certainly adware, but sometimes even malware. This is the most extensive Chrome extension. And it's important here too to distinguish between vulnerabilities, which are hypothetical, which are identified issues that need to be patched. And that's where the Spectre and the Meltdown vulnerabilities fit in, because there's still today on the 17th of January, we still don't have anything in the wild happening with those in terms of people being hacked, but we definitely do in this case. And so in this article, it talks about, how this one extension, it's called Change HTTP Request Header. They did some packet analysis, taking a look at the spike in outbound network traffic, and discovered that this Chrome extension was infecting a machine and surreptitiously visiting advertising-related links. And so brings up several different issues. Number one, yes, Chrome is great, and Chromebooks are great, and they boot quickly, but they're not immune. And one of the biggest opportunities for something that is malicious to come into your Chrome system, whether it's your Chrome browser on your Mac or your PC, or it's on a Chromebook, is for extensions. And so one of the things we found is really important working with users is to troubleshoot issues, especially if it's with a browser, is to see what extensions are on, and just go ahead and turn all the extensions off. It's a little bit like booting in safe mode if you're working with a PC, to say, let's boot up without all this extra stuff, see how things are doing, and then we'll add them, bit by bit. There's a popular extension called Grammarly, which we found for our student information system in terms of entering comments into the system actually caused issues. And so we encouraged our teachers to have that turned off. And then once they were done putting the comments in, then they could turn it on to, be able to get grammar tips and stuff like that. The second thing I would say on this is it's important to, what was my second point? I don't remember my second point. So what do you think, Jason? Were you using Change HTTP Request Header? And that was it. It's having intrusion detection on your network back in the late 1990s. It would have been actually would have been early 2000s, I guess. I was at Texas Tech University, and part of what they were doing at the time was setting up their network with intrusion detection, so that as soon as you connected via Wi-Fi, you would be port scanned, and basically the network would be able to see if you were spewing anything that looks suspicious or malicious. And if you were, you'd be quarantined and said, hey, download antivirus. You need to clean your machine up before you come on the rest of our network and either, suck bandwidth or contribute to somebody's, botnet or infect other machines. And so I don't know how many school networks are there yet. That is something that we're using a discovery tool that is being able to just go out to every single IP address and identify, what it is and whether it's in our inventory, and we're using it to identify some things, this was even today, that we weren't necessarily aware were running on our network. And I think that will continue to be a security best practice for schools and other organizations, making sure that you're segmenting your network, and ideally you have a way to find out when something malicious comes on your network, and then you can, do something to help that user hopefully get their system patched and fixed. And definitely, just like we got the flu going around, and we don't need all these sick people running around getting other people sick, same thing goes for computers. So have you run into any kind of Chrome extension issues, Jason, on either your own personal systems or others that you work on?
The answer is no, but I also, the one piece of advice I would also add to that is that something I've started doing recently is I go in and check my Chrome extensions every month or so to make sure that what is running is what I want running. Something you may not know about, this is true of Chrome extensions, Firefox extensions, Microsoft Edge extensions, is that the extension engine is amazing, right? You can do so many cool things with browsers by adding extensions to it. Chrome and Firefox are really both leaders in regards to this. But I think in the experimental phase, you may end up with a bunch of junk that you just don't need. And whether it's sniffing your information or not, it's also slowing down your browser. That's particularly true if you're logging on to a profile on your Chromebook that was pulled from a desktop environment, and it's pulling all sorts of extra extensions that you don't really ever use. And so this was recommended earlier in our program, but Extensity, I think is the name of it,
yep, that's it.
Is a great extension that allows you to keep only the extensions and applications on that you want to keep on. Otherwise, it turns them off. And so that's one way to help protect extensions from slowing things down. And then you know what you install. Just because a speaker at a conference or some dude that blogs, me and Wes included, may tell you that something is amazing, do your due diligence and look at reviews and see who created those particular snippets of code. But it's always user beware in these scenarios, and I think that's especially true when you're asking an external piece of software to plug in to your architecture.
All right. And Peggy has put into the chat that she has had to turn off her ad blocker several times, and yes, absolutely, that just happened last week with a teacher that I was working with, and something weird was happening, and we just let's turn off the ad blocker and see how that works. And sometimes that's it. That's the main thing. But a lot of extensions, they can slow things down, and it's part of troubleshooting.
Yep, absolutely.
Jason, so I think I would like to make sure we get to some of the more unusual predicted topics. I sent out a tweet today with a picture of a lobster and a robot and a it's supposed to be AI, so it was the robotic hand shaking the human hand. But I said that we're going to talk about sentience, robots, and technology ethics. And so there are two articles that I want to basically connect that I've been thinking about, and the second one really was the first one that came to mind. So I guess I'll start there. If you don't listen to Hidden Brain, which is an NPR podcast, and I don't know if I can pronounce the host's name correctly, and I need to probably practice that one, but it is fantastic. It is really a thought-provoking podcast, talking a lot about brain research and things that we find out about how the brain works. And so they were rerunning over the holidays some of their more famous, or not famous, but well, maybe they are more popular episodes. And this one's actually from the summer. It's a July 10th, 2017 episode, and it's called "Can Robots Teach Us What It Means to Be Human?" And it's interesting to me, sometimes you'll see headlines like this where the actual headline in the header or in the title bar of the browser tab or window is different. And so in this case, it is the title bar says, "Could you kill a robot?" And so it's talking about some really fascinating research with a researcher who's at the MIT Media Lab, Shankar, how am I going to say it? Vedantam. He is the host of Hidden Brain. And so anyway, he was interviewing this researcher, and part of what they're finding is we tend to anthropomorphize lots of objects. We will, we're not here where AI has become sentient and, very human-like, but, we have little dinosaurs being sold, and we give them names, and they have little robotic abilities to turn and to act very, very lifelike. And their research was showing that if they gave people hammers and said smash this this robot after they've especially given it a name, but they've observed it acting like it's alive, people are very hesitant to do it. It actually brings up some really interesting issues about empathy. And it said that, the people who might be most willing to smash these robots may be those that would exhibit the least amount of empathy for fellow human beings. The other article, which, you might say, why does that connect, is a Washington Post article more recently from January the 13th, 2018. And it says, another country has banned boiling live lobsters. Some scientists wonder why. And so the debate here is whether or not lobsters, crustaceans, pain. And there's some really interesting questions here that are philosophical, but they're tied to technology because, when do we ascribe rights to things that are not human? In the Hidden Brain episode, they're talking about, dogs and cats and other kinds of animals. And so there are limits, to the ways that you can treat a dog or a cat. You can't torture it. You can't, do just horrific things. Yes, you have the ability to, put your animal to sleep, but there are actually some legal protections that extend to pets and to other animals in the United States, and perhaps, I don't know what the laws are on this in other countries. Similarly, lobsters, they can be tossed into a boiling pot of water. I can tell you some pretty good stories about visiting some friends in Maine and having some pretty good meals that focused on that. But anyway, France and it wasn't France. What was this? It was Switzerland, which is not, a big country for farming lobsters, but they are, deciding that is an inhumane thing to do. So, Jason, do you have any guidance or thoughts on the whole idea of sentience? Was that ever a debate topic that came up, or what's your take on all of this in terms of AI? Because I guess I'm thinking this is just a pretty intriguing philosophical topic, but as machines get more lifelike, and as we create robots and toys as well that are at some point, and I think we can believe Ray Kurzweil. I think we're going here. He says we're gonna be here by 2029. Become issues. Should robots have rights at some level?
It is a fascinating question. I think part of the challenge.
I don't know. I'll ask the chat, Jason.
Conversations later, because it is if we don't, then we're gonna if the robots become too charming, we might not be able to, put them out to the scrap heap, right? And so, or we might over trust in them when, if cognizance is reached on the robot's part. Man, this is already getting so geeky, but it really does create a really challenging ethical issue. And that's where, and Wes and I talk about this a lot, but you don't need to get into a 3 or 4 day long robot discussion to start peeking into the ethical implications of these things, but you can start with, basic questions, whether or not robots have feelings, for example. And there's not enough in our decided about these technologies yet for humans to not have a significant say in that. So I'm still looking at this pretty leerily, and my wife and I have talked a lot about driverless cars and arguably robots, right? And we talk about what happens the first time that someone is killed by a driverless car, and inevitably that will happen soon in that game. Who's responsible for that, right?
Oh,
and that's the kind of thing that if you haven't decided how that works, or things like liability, that's going to create conundrums that we might not be able to find our way out of. And so, yeah, I find it all quite fascinating, and I think it's also intriguing that people are looking at this in terms of existing ethical conundrums that we have. And so, yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I'm not sure if I have much insight other than to say, man, do we have a lot of things to think about as this technology evolves much faster than we're creating good ethical foundations to be able to engage with it.
We really do. And part of what this Hidden Brain episode talks about as well is you know, we might not just ascribe rights to robots because of our perceived need to protect them, but it also might be to protect the individuals who might be doing them harm. In other words, if somebody was going to, you know, be kicking a robot, destroying one, you know, being very brutal with it, you know, or with a toy, I mean, that can have impact on them as well. It makes you think of video games and first-person shooters and things like that. My last little thought on this is, I really think that we ought to find ways to bring toy hacking into school. And I've had a chance to go up to Vermont a couple times in 2013, and then this past summer with my wife to the Create, Make, and Learn conference. Shout out to Lucy, who does such an amazing, she's tech savvy girl on Twitter. She does such an awesome job organizing that. And I wasn't able to, I haven't really gotten a chance to do that, where you'll have people bring toys, but then have sensors and motors and, you know, be able to basically hack the toys and get them to either sense or move or interact in some way. And so this is a personal challenge for myself as I talk out loud about this, is I think, you know, when we want to engage more young ladies in coding and STEM activities, we can't just offer more math classes that are the same as the old math classes. We can't just, you know, offer classes that are, you know, just straight up, hey, let's learn to code because it's cool. You know, some of the research and some of the things I've seen, you know, show that, you know, and this isn't just something for girls, this appeals to guys too, you know, are interested in things like improving the world, solving a problem, making a prosthetic leg for a shelter dog that, you know, lost its limb. And so anyway, thinking about the ways that STEM gets brought into different things. And I think toy hacking is something that, you know, might appeal to a broader audience of kids who might not think, yeah, I want to sign up for the coding club. And so maybe my wife and I next week start our after school Scratch club. And I'm going to work on pushing myself with some of the ways that you can connect Scratch code to real objects in terms of moving them and getting them to do some things. And so anyway, I think all of that connects because Rachel, our 8th grader, is in a trimester course right now for robotics, and she's almost done with the second challenge. And she asked me the other day, she said, Dad, are there jobs to do, you know, doing this in the future? And I'm like, yes, honey, there's a lot of future in folks that are going to work with robotic systems and algorithms and, you know, ways to solve problems and to use code to do that. And so there's the philosophical level, which we can kind of talk about and will be a practical issue for lawyers and ethicists as well as perhaps the rest of us. But then there's also a real practical side to all of that. So definitely, if nothing else, a good writing prompt for you to, you know, take on.
Absolutely so.
All right, where to next? We got about 10 minutes till the top of the hour.
Let me do one other something. Actually, never mind. Let's save this.
Oh, Jason is having a few bandwidth issues, and I did confirm that in the chat with Marta and Peggy. So I am not sure if the Missoula, Montana internet bandwidth is giving him trouble, or sometimes when we're having those bandwidth issues, you don't know if it's yourself, and he's popping back in. So there he is. He's back. What's the next topic? I'm
so mysterious. I was going to actually, I'm not going to repeat what I repeated because I changed my mind in the middle, went somewhere else. I like to do some CES updates. 2 great articles out of CES from last week. CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, live from Las Vegas. And the 2 articles I want to focus on first, Chrome Unboxed has an excellent video on Razer's effort towards Project Linda. And we were first reported to Project Linda last week, but Project Linda is the notion of taking an Android phone, slipping it into a clamshell that has a screen and a laptop keyboard, and turning that phone into a full-size laptop. And they have a wonderful video. Chrome Unboxed, by the way, wonderful website for those of you interested in Chrome OS and Chrome devices. But it shows you what it looks like when the Razer phone pops into the keyboard shell and then pops up a desktop style system where you can then run all of your Android applications. And so I wanted to mention that that particular piece, but I also want to mention a really great article from Android Police from 16 January 2018, or as Leo Laporte calls them, the Android Popo. But Android Police is reporting that one of their writers, David Ruderick, reports that he was able to use his Chromebook, his Pixelbook, which is the newest Google Chromebook hardware, very high-end, expensive hardware, and basically did everything he needed to do throughout CES on that platform. He felt it was a extraordinary platform, and now sees the point of Chromebooks. And not only did he talk about how great it was to be able to utilize this platform as his primary driver, but he talked about when he needed a very specific functionality that was missing from the Chrome environment, he was able to download it utilizing a Google Play Store Android app, so that he was able to do his job pretty efficiently. And I got to say, I'm probably Chrome OS in some way or another, whether it's an official one on a Chromebook like I'm on right now, or at work I use a desktop with Cloud Ready from Neverware 80% of the time now, and I do just fine. Right now, I'm a very web-based job, and I don't do a lot with specific applications. I've been able to recreate all of that either online or with Android apps, but it really is a powerful platform. And if you put the hardware behind it, if you have a decent chip and enough RAM, it really can produce a really high-end results. And so, at some point, Wes and I are going to talk about Chromebooks for an entire show. But I thought that article really well articulated what I've been experiencing as a Chrome user.
And as I mentioned, after I got back from Egypt in November, I took our family 11-inch Dell Chromebook as my only laptop to Egypt, did all of my presentations and workshops on it, and thankfully did bring a VGA adapter, because even in their auditorium, I mean, VGA was what they had everywhere. That was what we had at our school, everywhere a couple years ago. We're kind of catching up with HDMI in terms of replacing with projectors and TVs and things like that. But it is, it's great. And I have experienced this and continue to, from both the tech director standpoint in terms of support, the differences between Chrome and other platforms. I think that it is challenging for any of us, and it's because of baby duck syndrome. Look that up on Wikipedia. That's where we get imprinted with a particular platform, whether that's I use the smart board and smart notebook and I can't shift out of that, or, I'm using my Mac, I'm using my Windows. I will say, my philosophy for a long time has been, I love powerful tools that just work. And I use that a lot of times to say why I loved Mac so much, and especially with respect to Windows and the comparative complexity that I perceived in doing, similar kinds of tasks, especially things that involve graphic design and page layout and things like that. But it really is a great thing to see Chrome advancing. And I don't have this in the show notes, but this last Monday, this week, I was out in Eastern Oklahoma in Stillwell at the Marietta School with our Story Chasers team, and helped about 40 teachers create ebooks on their laptops. Now, a lot of them were on a MacBook laptop using the Chrome browser, but this works in Chrome. Book Creator has come to the Chrome platform, and it was not only exciting to see that happen in action, but the way that they've done that, where you as the teacher have a shared library and you have a code, much like you do with Google Classroom, where you give that to the students and then they all create a book and it's in your library. And so I've done a lot of these over the years with teachers and students on iPads, but those ebooks are out on their devices, and then it becomes this puzzle of how do you get your book to me? Well, when we were doing it in the cloud, all of those books were in the library, and it may sound trite, but it was a little bit magical. And so I'm quite excited about that. And we'll be sharing, I am sharing that with not only our high school teachers in a project we're doing right now that's seniors are making picture books for pre-K kids, but I've been talking with some of our middle school English teachers as well. So definitely exciting. And I would just say we helping teachers, not as much even students, but faculty, staff, teachers. How are we helping shift people's perceptions of what a platform can do and what its capabilities are? Sometimes it's telling that little story, just like this journalist was telling his story from CES. A friend of mine who's recently taken over as a tech director said that the previous tech director had just told everyone Chromebooks were horrible. They couldn't work for testing. They were just useless. And the only thing they needed to get were Macs. And while I love Macs, I'm using 2 today. This is, show notes are here, and I'm using my wife's Mac to make the call. There's a ton of stuff we can do with the Chromebook. And so if the Chromebook can do 80 to 90% of what we need to do, are we really using our funds in the most financially responsible way to purchase systems that essentially are overkill for the kinds of function we have? I think that's a pretty important question to consider. And it's important in the context of what you were talking about, Jason, with Meltdown and Spectre, because if these systems are crippling older systems, the refresh cycles that we have in schools as well as other organizations may need to accelerate because we may need to buy new hardware. And so if we're doing that, I think we better look closely at Chrome and watch these kinds of initiatives that we've been talking about on the show, especially those ones where they're trying to, allow different kinds of apps to run within the Chrome environment.
Right, absolutely, and again, we'll definitely come up with this notion soon of talking about the merits of Chrome in a longer show. But I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't say that we can't spend our time saying that this platform is always better than another, because the bottom line is that probably great classrooms are using 2 or 3 different platforms in addition to whatever your kids are carrying in their pockets. And we are in a multi-platform world, right? Like, that's one of the reasons why I think that I enjoy being an Android phone user, a Chromebook mobile person, and I've got an iMac at work, and then I switch off with a Windows machine. I like to be versed in all of those pieces, but also, depending on what I'm doing, they all, have their advantages and disadvantages. And if you're doing a lot of interesting things in your classroom related to that, I would think that it's probably not Chromebooks, it's probably not Windows laptops, it's probably not Mac laptops, it's probably not iPads, it's probably not Android phones, it's probably not iPhones. It's all of the above, right? We need platforms, software-wise, that can be on all phones, all tablets, all laptops, all mobile devices, so that we can, make students efficient no matter what device they can have in their hands or afford.
Absolutely. Well, I think we probably better Geek of the Week it. We're about at the top of the hour. I'll go first and then let you close out, Jason. 2 quick ones. The first one, I hope I'm not struck by lightning sharing this, although McGill Gulen, lover of all things Microsoft now, will be excited. Microsoft has a launcher for Android, and for others who are either new to Android or foreign to Android, unlike the iPhone, you can decide what you want your graphical interface to look and feel like, and they're called launchers. And the one that came with this Moto phone, I used initially. Tommy Snyder, who works with us at halftime in technology at our school, told me about the Nova launcher, which is a pretty powerful one that's flexible and you can do a lot with. But this one is a Microsoft launcher. So I've only been using it a couple days, but it's free. It actually feels a little more iPhone-ish in terms of some of the features. But it was kind of cool to use that. And then the next thing is just the YouTube Safety Center. I'm continuing to work on a website, digital citizenship site, digcit.us. Getting resources together for things we're doing with parents as well as with teachers and students at our school around themes of digital citizenship. And I think that YouTube's abilities that it offers not only schools in terms of limiting content, but families, restricted mode, special apps, resources for parents, privacy and safety settings. It's important to know all this stuff. And I'm going to be sharing some parent workshops here in the next month, and YouTube is going to be one of the main topics. And so I was glad to find this resource center that they have. So, Jason, I think you must be doing some kind of screen sharing.
I am screen sharing too. Yes, yeah, I want you to take a hard look at yourself, Dr. Fryer. So I want to share something that if you've been on social media in the last week, this has already smacked you in the face. But I was so impressed with this as a digital tool. The Google Arts and Culture app has released an experiment where you can take a selfie of yourself, and then it finds comparisons with art in the larger cultural phenomenon of art. And I will share, I'm going to my Facebook page here. This is my my lookalike. There was a much older dude that was number one, but I took an early morning selfie the other day, and this is what it matched up. And it's, you know, less curly of hair, and maybe my beard is slightly more kept, but pretty legit and close. And what I love about this particular tool is it really is an AI experiment, right? Like it's, by the way, on iOS and Android, and you have to download the Google Arts and Culture app and then dig a little around into it. It's not as obvious as one would think, but take a selfie and then it does this. And I will say, of the probably 50 people that shared these on my Facebook feed in the last 72 hours, they've been, you know, fairly accurate. And so I've been pretty impressed with, you know, what this looks like and the impressive technology behind it. But this is the Google Arts and Culture app. Really well done. Google experiment that kind of shows off the power of AI. And, you know, see this as scary or not, the bottom line is that if you are not at least acknowledging that your image can be a kind of useful phenomenon in you know, matching, right? You have a very unique face, whether you know it or not. And every time Facebook is telling you, hey, is this picture so-and-so, so you can tag it, that is artificial intelligence at work. So it may be a gimmick, but I do think it shows off the power of these particular technologies. That's the Google Arts and Culture app, and I put in 2 links this week. One article that sends you off to links in both the iOS and Android Play Store, and also some notes that it has rocketed this app to the top of free app lists. So you can probably find it there as well. So Google Arts and Culture.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for the EdTech Situation Room. Especially thanks and a big shout out to Marta and Peggy joining us live in our chat room. We are here on most Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain. What did we say the UTC was? It's not 1400. It was something
3 a.m. UTC.
Okay, so 0300 UTC. And you can catch all these links at edtechsr.com/links. Everybody have a great week, and we'll hope to see you next week for more discussion of the week's technology news with an educational lens. Good night.
Thank you.